reopen. First days of spring, the sky is bright blue, the sun huge and warm. I thought it would be when I chose these opening words. Everything's turning green. Carrying my monk's bowl, I walk to the village to beg for my daily meal. The children spot me at the temple gate and happily crowd around, dragging to my arms till I stop. I put my bowl on a white rock, hang my bag on a branch. First, we braid grasses and play tug of war. Then we take turns singing and keeping a kickball in the air. I kick the ball and they sing, they kick and I sing. Time is forgotten, the hours fly. People passing by point at me and laugh. Why are you acting like such a fool? I nod my head and don't answer. I could say something, but why? Do you want to know what's in my heart? From the beginning of time. Just this. Just this. Just this. Morning has broken. Our first hymn is number 38.
encouraging wholeness. We give thanks for this extraordinary blessing, the gathering together of separate, unique individuals as one whole community. Here may our minds stretch, our hearts open, our spirits deepen. Here may we acknowledge our brokenness and be ever stirred by love's infinite possibilities. Here, may we become the people the world needs. My name is Megan Lyons. I'm one of the ministers here at the First Parish. If you are visiting for the first time this morning, don't be a stranger. See if you could stick around for coffee hour behind me through these doors and stop by the welcome table and tell us a little about you, find out a little bit more about us. Another way to stay in touch is to fill out a little blue connection card in your pews, and that's just a way to get a phone call from your minister. It's also a way to get a newsletter to come to your house. You can check which box applies to you. In the front of your order of service, you'll see some upcoming things that are happening this week. Something that didn't make it in there but should have is Wednesday at 7 o'clock we have a budget hearing. This is a chance for all of us to come together to meet with Bob, our treasurer, Johnson, also the parish board, and it's a chance to think together, review our budget for the coming year, and to get input from the congregation. So it's here on Wednesday night at 7. Our Lyceum this morning, it's actually this afternoon today at 12:30. 4 times a year we've had this experiment of having Lyceum after the second service. So please join us for the newly formed First Parish Intergenerational Task Force on incarceration issues, and that is the group that is sponsoring along with the Lyceum a special topic. This is Andrea James. She is a former criminal defense attorney, community activist, author, mother, and felon, and she will speak on alternatives to mass incarceration. Please come and join the conversation. Sandwiches are for sale right after this service by the senior youth group if you're someone who would really like to attend but you're hungry. The Green Sanctuary and Peace and Justice Committees invite you to join the book discussion of this book called The Green Boat, Reviving Ourselves in Our Capsized Culture. It's a great book. It's Friday, May 2nd, 10 a.m. for that discussion. On Tuesday night, we had our annual trip for a spring concert to the Veterans Hospital just across the way. And this is something that we love doing. We go 3 times a year. And choir sings, we read stories, ministers share a little a welcome, a talk, and it's a really nice way to be together with people who served our country and who love to visit. And I think the last thing I'm going to let you know is that Ferry Beach registrations are coming up to be due. You can sign up today at coffee hour. It's the last coffee hour time to sign up. You can also turn in registrations at the office through Tuesday. And Ferry Beach is just a great outing. It's a weekend outing for our whole congregation. All are invited. It's very intergenerational and very fun. If you haven't heard about it, you can talk to Carla Bradford. And you can also talk to me, John, Laura. All of us will be able to tell you a little bit more about it. All are welcome. And let's see, Rich is going to join us up here for a little tiny review, a brief status report on our stewardship campaign. Welcome, one and all.
My name is Rich Doherty. I am the co-chair of your stewardship committee, sharing that responsibility with DJ Crowell. We used to get big bucks for this in general. Kind of fun. And I will use the microphone so that those of you who have hearing aids can hear. Well, we have right now $263,000 collected out of a goal of $435,000, and that's from 139 budgets. Okay? We need another $172,000 from 162 contacts left to do something. Okay? Of those 162 that are left, look at this real closely. 110 last year pledged $172,000. Guess how much more we need to go to get from there to there? $172,000. So there you go. You 110 come on through. There are about 45 others that I need to contact one way or another that have not pledged yet, haven't pledged in the last 5 years, haven't done something. So we need you to respond and get it done in time for us to get a rational budget put together for our annual meeting. I'll put this over here, so depending on how the rest of the service goes, you may want to stare at this and ponder it. Good morning.
My name is Bob Batt, and I'm a member of the lay pastoral team here at First Parish. I'd like all those who would like to share a joy or concern to come forward at this time. Please focus your thoughts and be brief. I will be here at the candle stand after the service for those who would like to light a silent candle. Light a final candle for those joys and concerns we keep in our hearts.
This being a vacation week, our religious education program is a little different this morning, but nonetheless, now is a good time for kids and teachers to go off as we sing, "Oh, give us pleasure in the flowers today." It's number 64. We're about to get a report from the Hive, but let me preface this by saying that today is an Earth Day themed service. You know, it's not all that easy to find hymns that have mentions of bees in them, and we've done pretty well on that score. I want to call your attention to the back of the order of service and the Honey Bee Luya campaign. Some of you may remember Reverend Billy from the Church of Stop Shopping. Reverend Billy and his gospel choir have performed here twice before. And there is more to Reverend Billy than you or I want to go into right at the moment. But suffice to say, he is a performance artist from New York City, and he wears a white suit with a collar and big hair, and again, a big gospel choir behind him. And you can't quite tell if it's theater, or is it politics, or is it religion, or is it comedy, and it's actually a little bit of all of those things. And he often has an environmentalist theme, and his most recent campaign is the Honey Bee Luya campaign. And the choir is adorned in hundreds of these bees, and they have a number of bee and buzz-related songs. And last Tuesday, I joined Reverend Billy and the choir at Harvard's School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, where they are developing miniature drone bees, mechanical bees, in part for the possibility of mechanical pollination. You know, for a variety of reasons, we're doing things that are destroying the flowers and are destroying the bees. And so our friends at Harvard are preparing for a bee-less future when we can have mechanical bees do mechanical pollination. Well, with Reverend Billy and the choir, we entered into the hallowed halls of Dworkin Hall, and in the stairwell, Billy with his bullhorn preached, and the choir buzzed around, and you can imagine that a number of people emerged from their labs and wondered what the heck was going on around here. And amazingly, they did not call security, so that we were in there for about 45 minutes, after which we went over to take a nice look at the glass flowers across the street on Oxford Street. And in any case, we may be returning to the Harvard School of Engineering and Applied Science this coming week with the environmentalist writer Betsy Colbert. And you can read about our adventures at Harvard in the Village Voice. And if you go to Reverend Billy's website, which is noted on the back page, you can find a report of our adventures at Harvard. But bees are something of the canaries in the coal mine, and the condition of the hives tells us a lot about what is going on in the larger environment. And so I thought it would be good for us to get a report from the hive. And one of our First Parish distinguished beekeepers is Doug Townsend, and please give us a report from the hive.
Good morning. I've been keeping bees in Bedford for 30 years. This past year, I lost 50% of my hives. In the year before, I lost 100%. As you well know, bees are dying all across the country, not just in Bedford. This is significant because a third of the food we eat is dependent on pollination from bees. The death of all these hives is a complex issue, and some of the top scientists in the country are working to try to understand this better. There are many factors that contribute to hives dying. I could talk for hours about these, but I won't. For some of these factors, beekeepers ourselves, we have to take ownership of them and change the way we practice beekeeping. An example is in the past, some beekeepers have been applying miticides to kill a parasitic mite. That has been a contributing problem. A quote by a well-known beekeeper and writer is, "The application of chemicals inside the hive is not sustainable." With other factors contributing to bee deaths, we need your help. One of these factors is the overuse of pesticides, herbicides, fungicides. All these are used too much, are used incorrectly, and with insufficient thought on whether we need to use them. This is contributed to the This is one of the factors that is contributing to the problems we're seeing with the bees dying. To take a step back, I majored in biology and I took college-level entomology. And one of the things I learned in entomology class, and one point is, like everything in life, there's a balance. But what I learned in my class is that before pesticides were invented, that insects were consuming at least 2/3 of all the crops we grew, and that a lot of people were dying from diseases transmitted by insects, and that the pesticides has helped reduce hunger and save lives from insect-transmitted diseases. However, the overuse of pesticides has caused the extinction and near extinction of a number of species, particularly birds of prey. Getting back to the bees, there have been studies that indicate that an adult bee may not be affected by a pesticide. Researchers are finding complex interactions between fungicides, pesticides, herbicides, even some of the chemicals that beekeepers had been putting in their hives themselves. Essentially, you put adult bees in a cage and you spray them with insecticide, and if they live, it doesn't mean that everything's okay. One bees can bring pollen back to the hive with one insecticide, another bee can bring some other pollen with another insecticide back to a hive, and then there can be a complex interaction between the two, and they use pollen to feed the larvae, and these can end up being toxic to the larva, which is basically, if they don't make it, the hive's not going to make it. So essentially, what I'd ask is that, please follow the labels on any insecticides that you use. Read the labels carefully, follow the labels, and then also please decide carefully whether you really need to use this pesticide or herbicide or fungicide before using it. A couple of examples. Years ago, I aspired to have a nice lawn. So, I went to the nursery and says, oh yeah, you put this step 1, 2, 3, 4 stuff on and you'll end up with a great lawn. And I think I got to step 2 and I got to step 3 and I read the label. And it said, like, don't let your kids walk on it, don't let your pets walk on it. This will kill all the grubs. And I'm like, well, why? I didn't even know if I had a grub problem, so why should I put this stuff on if I don't even know if I have a problem? What's wrong with a few grubs? So, just give some thought. Another example, my wife Kate and I were sitting out on our back deck a couple of years ago. We were sitting out on a Friday afternoon, having a drink on the deck. And the neighbor behind us was spraying a hose. She had someone come in to spray stuff all around her backyard. And, the guy was just going crazy and, spraying up in trees. It was coming in our lawns into our yard. And it's like, Kate and I had to go in and it smelled so bad. And so I went over and talked to him and I said, well, what are you spraying? He says, oh, it's imidacloprid. And, if you read the back of the, for the service, this is one of the controversial neonicotinoids that are banned in France. I was talking to him, I said, well, there's hives over here. They had like half a dozen hives, and he hadn't even noticed. And he was maybe a little bit panicked and gave me the card, like, if you have any problems, you can contact my supervisor and stuff. And so the owner saw me talking to him, and she came over and talked to me. I said, so, I asked her very seriously, what are you spraying for? And she just says, like, everything. And it's like I was stunned. And I think she kind of got where I was coming from, and it's like, if you need to spray, be careful. Ants, termites eating away your sills, yeah, call an exterminator and gingerly, try to treat it. But, just to emphasize, I don't want anyone to get encephalitis. I'm happy to secure my bees at night if the town needs to spray. When the town sprays, they follow the law, they spray at night, and they apply it the way the label dictates. So it just, please use as much forethought as possible when you're using any insecticides, fungicides, or herbicides. So thank you.
Thanks, Doug.
this is the way that Rachel Carson prefaced Silent Spring, written in 1962, A Fable for Tomorrow. There was once a town in the heart of America where all life seemed to live in harmony with its surroundings. The town lay in the midst of a checkerboard of prosperous farms with fields of grain and hillsides of orchards where, in spring, white clouds of bloom drifted above the green fields. In autumn, oak and maple and birch set up a blaze of color that flamed and flickered across a backdrop of pines. Then foxes barked in the hills and deer silently crossed the fields, half hidden in the mists of the fall mornings.
Along the roads, laurel, viburnum, and alder, great ferns and wildflowers delighted the traveler's eye through much of the year. Even in winter, the roadsides were places of beauty, where countless birds came to feed on the berries and on the seed heads of the dried weeds rising above the snow. The countryside was, in fact, famous for the abundance and variety of its bird life, and when the flood of migrants was pouring through in spring and fall, people traveled from great distances to observe them. Others came to fish in the streams, which flowed clear and cold out of the hills and contained shady pools where trout lay. So it had been from the days many years ago when the first settlers raised their houses, sank their wells, and built their barns.
Then a strange blight crept over the area, and everything began to change. Some evil spell had settled on the community. Mysterious maladies swept the flocks of chickens. The cattle and sheep sickened and died. Everywhere was a shadow of death. The farmers spoke of much illness among their families. In the town, the doctors had become more and more puzzled by the new kinds of sickness appearing among their patients. There had been several sudden and unexplained deaths, not only among adults, but even among children, who would be stricken suddenly while at play and die within a few hours.
There was a strange stillness. The birds, for example, where had they gone? Many people spoke of them, puzzled and disturbed. The feeding stations in the backyards were deserted. The few birds seen anywhere were moribund. They trembled violently and could not fly. It was a spring without voices. On the mornings that had once throbbed with the dawn chorus of robins, catbirds, doves, jays, wrens, and scores of other bird voices, there was now no sound. Only silence lay over the fields and woods and marsh.
On the farms, the hens brooded, but no chicks hatched. The farmers complained that they were unable to raise any pigs. The litters were so small, and the young survived only a few days. The apple trees were coming into bloom, but no bees droned among the blossoms, so there was no pollination, and there would be no fruit.
The roadsides, once so attractive, were now lined with browned and withered vegetation as though swept with fire. These too were silent, deserted by all living beings. Even the streams were now lifeless. Anglers no longer visited them, for all the fish had died.
In the gutters under the eaves and between the shingles of the roofs, a white granular powder still showed a few patches. Some weeks before, it had fallen like snow upon the roofs and the lawns, the fields, and the streams. No witchcraft, no enemy action had silenced the rebirth of new life in this stricken world. The people had done it themselves. It was Khalil Gibran who once wrote, "I would give, but only to the deserving. The trees of your orchard and the sheep in your flocks say, not so. They give so that they might live." and so too we give that we may live. Freely we have received, freely give. For the good work of this congregation, within and far, far beyond these walls, our offering will now gratefully be received. With that fable for tomorrow, Rachel Carson began Silent Spring, her prophetic expose of the long-term effects of pesticides upon our environment. Ironically, she died of cancer at the age of 56, just 19 months after its publication in 1962. Though I preached a version of this sermon 19 years ago, I have decided to revise and improve it and to talk about her life and work today because of Earth Day and because today is Rachel Carson's birthday, and because I also discovered that she was indeed a Unitarian Universalist. And also because our Unitarian Universalist publishing house, Beacon Press, has published a remarkable collection of intimate letters between Rachel, and it seems like all of her biographers refer to her by her first name, and her dear friend Dorothy Freeman. Always Rachel is this collection's title, and it tenderly reveals the private life of a woman whose public impact was enormous. In fact, reading Always Rachel moved me to read all that I could find by and about Rachel Carson, and I'm prepared to say that her quiet, thoughtful, measured, and sensitive private life makes her one of the most significant public lives of our times, less well known than she should be or may yet be to future generations. So I want to do three things this morning. First, to recollect Rachel's life and contribution to history. Second, to reflect upon her friendship with Dorothy Freeman, and indeed the importance of friendship to all our lives. And last, I want to remind us of the religious value that was at the center of Rachel's life and is, I think, at the center of our conviction as well, and that is the sense of wonder. It is hard to remember what life was like before Rachel Carson, for me at least, because I was only 10 years old in 1962. But when I was 8 or 9, I remember the mosquito control trucks that each spring rumbled slowly through the streets of my suburban neighborhood outside Chicago. How many of you remember the rumbling mosquito control trucks? Of course. From a tank in back, the trucks emitted an immense cloud of pure DDT. My friends and I thought this spectacle was pretty darn cool. And so we like to ride our bikes directly behind the trucks, trying not to run into one another's bike, blinded by the fog and enshrouded by DDT. Of course, our parents made no objection whatsoever. My life, I suspect, was saved because I like to ride my bike in the DDT and wear the weird-looking Nazi gas mask that my father had brought back from the war. I wore the mask purely because it looked weird, not for any safety reason. And on the other hand, if you think me odd today, this may explain some things. Before Rachel Carson, the very word environment carried none of the associations it has for us today. The word ecology was not in use. Instead, one spoke of conservation, which was more of an attempt to accommodate the needs of nature to the dominion of humankind. Conservation, moreover, was primarily an economic consideration. We need more and better pesticides to grow bigger and better crops, to make agriculture more profitable and more convenient for the farmer. Rachel Carson approached these issues from an altogether different direction. We had entered the age of chemicals willy-nilly, she argued, without considering the totality of nature. processes within nature were working to undo the very things we hope to achieve using pesticides, thereby causing large-scale imbalances. She urged us to better understand nature and to use its processes to our advantage without the use of pesticides. Rachel Carson was a marine biologist and an elegant author. She had already won sufficient acclaim for her book, The Sea Around Us, that she was able to quit her government job as head of publications for the Department of Fish and Wildlife. What made Silent Spring so stunning, however, was its humanity. This is one of its passages. In one of the most tragic cases of endrin poisoning, there was no apparent carelessness. Efforts had been made to take precautions considered adequate. A year-old child had been taken by his American parents to live in Venezuela. There were cockroaches in the house to which they moved, and after a few days, a spray containing endrin was used. The baby and the small family dog were taken out of the house before the spraying was done about 9 o'clock in the morning. After the spraying, the floors were washed. The baby and dog were returned to the house in mid-afternoon. An hour or so later, the dog vomited, went into convulsions, and died. At 10 p.m. on the evening of the same day, the baby also vomited, went into convulsions, and ultimately became little more than a vegetable. Her stories were ones to which American people could relate. The danger was real. One's own children and pets were in peril, not far away, but in one's own home. She also demonstrated that we were endangered not just by the obvious, don't ride your bike in a cloud of DDT, but by the accumulation of small doses over a long period of time. Again, she made it personal, saying, "The contamination of our world is not alone a matter of mass spraying. Indeed, for most of us, this is of less importance than the innumerable small-scale exposures to which we are subjected day after day, year after year. Like the constant dripping of water that in turn wears away the hardest stone, this birth-to-death contact with dangerous chemicals may in the end prove disastrous. No person is immune to contact with this spreading contamination." Again, there is perhaps no book in the last 100 years that has had more impact than Silent Spring, and yet many of these dangers persist. At the time, of course, the pesticide industry was apoplectic. They treated the public uproar as a serious public relations problem. You know, when I went in with Reverend Billy and the choir to Dworkin Hall and the labs at Harvard, no, they didn't call security on us, but who should show up to monitor us? The Public Relations Department. And so, after the publication of Silent Spring, the chemical industry commissioned a book to refute it. That book was called A Desolate Year, and that book imagined the horrors of life without chemicals, something that Rachel had not herself recommended. They challenged her science, they called her hysterical, an extremist, and probably a communist. Time magazine ridiculed her. "It is not possible," says Miss Carson, "to add pesticides to water anywhere without threatening the purity of water everywhere. It takes only a moment of reflection," said Time magazine, "to show that this is nonsense." Reader's Digest withdrew the offer to print a selection from Silent Spring and chose instead to reprint the disparaging article from Time. And most interestingly, when the American Medical Association was questioned about the truth of Rachel's allegations, the AMA referred inquirers to pamphlets issued by Monsanto and the other pesticide companies. Reverend Billy in the Honey Bee Luya campaign also has a slogan, Monsanto, you make my stinger itch. Ultimately, Silent Spring and the reaction it inflamed exposed a medical industrial complex in conspiracy against the health of the world's people. Still, and to its great credit, the American government responded to Rachel's revelations. John F. Kennedy in the White House, Stuart Udall at Interior, Hubert Humphrey in the Senate, William O. Douglas in the Supreme Court, they proposed, implemented, and defended legislation that regulated industry, set standards, saved lives, and changed the course of history. Still, and again, not enough, but something. Today, however much Tea Partiers and racist rogue ranchers in Nevada ridicule the federal government, it was Rachel Carson who proved not only that small disruptions to the ecosystem can have large and unintended effects, but also that human beings and government have the power to reverse the damage and live in greater harmony with nature. One hears echoes of Rachel Carson reading today's newspapers. The Ebola virus, Legionnaire's disease, hantavirus, toxic shock syndrome, the spread of Lyme disease here in New England. All these emerging diseases are consequences of human intervention in the ecosystem, deforestation, increasing travel, and social change. Rachel Carson's gospel remains right on. I've just recently been introduced to the writings of Betsy Colbert, the writer environmentalist for the New Yorker, who is expected to join me and Reverend Billy later this week for our return engagement in Dworkin Hall. Betsy Colbert has written numerous books about our environmental crisis, most recently, The Sixth Extinction, An Unnatural History. She says in our planetary history, there have been 5 historical extinctions caused by meteoroids and other external forces. And now, she says, we face a 6th mass extinction unlike the others, for it will be one that we ourselves, human beings, have created. Recalling the extinction of the dodo bird and the great auk, Betsy Colbert says, by the latest estimation, 1/3 of reef corals, 1/3 of freshwater mollusks, 1/3 of sharks and rays, 1/5 of all reptiles, 1/4 of all mammals, and 1/6 of all birds will go the way of the auk this century. Her most urgent warning is about the condition of our oceans. Again, Betsy Colbert says, since the advent of the Industrial Revolution, the carbon dioxide absorbed by the sea has increased by 30%. The specific result of this is to prevent calcifiers, animals from corals to bivalves, and even some plants from forming their structures with disastrous effects for the marine food chain. The acidifying oceans mean that all coral reefs, which support up to 9 million other species, will have dissolved within 50 years. Does that matter, she asks? And she answers, well, it depends on what value you place on our world. Colbert concludes with a quote from the ecologist Paul Ehrlich. In pushing other species to extinction, humanity is busy sawing off the limb on which it perches. And so it was Rachel Carson who led the way. In a 1962 Peanuts comic strip, Lucy is saying, "Look, Charlie Brown, I got a new baseball bat for my birthday. Whose name is on it? Willie Mantle? Willie Mays? Mickey Mantle? Willie Mays? It must be a girl's bat," says Lucy, reading the label. It says Rachel Carson. A cartoon in Punch shows two businessmen looking at a dead dog. This is the dog that bit the cat, that killed the rat, that ate the malt that came from the grain that Jack sprayed. And one more cartoon showed a praying mantis with whatever they are called folded in front, saying, "God bless Mama and Papa and Rachel Carson." Throughout her life, Rachel was intensely private, shy. She was no grandstander. Though Silent Spring thrust her into the public glare of publicity and congressional hearings, she retreated to her home in Silver Spring, Maryland, and in the summer to her cottage on Southport Island in Maine. It is this private life that the book Always Rachel tenderly reveals. The correspondence with Dorothy Freeman began in 1952. Rachel responded to a note which Dorothy had written on behalf of herself and her husband, welcoming their new summer neighbor at Southport. She addressed the note, "Dear Mrs. Freeman," and she signed it, "Sincerely, Rachel L. Carson." The rest of the year, the Freemans lived in West Bridgewater, and except for the short Maine summers, Rachel and Dorothy nurtured their relationship by mail. By the time of Rachel's death in 1964, they had exchanged more than 750 letters. Can you imagine? The respect and affection each held for the other soon grew to a deep and abiding love. They were not apparently lovers. My impression is that their circumstances and times did not allow what would otherwise have been natural, and thus each ached from their almost constant separation. They addressed one another as darling and dear heart. They gave constant assurance of their love and desire to be in one another's arms, and they signed "With love" and "I need you" and "Always." Their longing for one another is so intimate that even they decided to burn some of their letters lest their friendship be scandalized. The hardship and discipline of writing added to the intensity of their sharing. Rachel wrote, "If we could have arranged our lives as we would have chosen to be in daily association, we might have defeated ourselves by so doing, for it well may be that the enforced separation and the necessity of writing instead of speaking have contributed to the depth of love and understanding that have developed." Dorothy and Rachel shared everything: music, books, their discoveries in tide pools and at backyard bird feeders, Rachel's difficulties caring for her aged mother with whom she lived, and later with her niece's son whom she adopted after her niece's death. When Rachel's mother died at age 93, Rachel lamented, "Do you know when I think I shall miss her the most? When we sit down together and she will not be there to say grace." Rachel emerges as eloquent, self-effacing, generous, and humane. Reading their correspondence caused me to reflect on my friendships and friendships in general. Intimate friendships among men or between women and men are surely more rare than those between women, though even those are hardly common, and even less now so with lives still more fragmented by work and time and expectation. And yet I believe that there is something found in the deep friendship between Rachel and Dorothy that each of us needs to give balance to our public and private lives, to ground us in human realities, and to enable us perhaps to make a difference in the world. Rachel's friendship with Dorothy truly enabled Rachel to persist in her writing, her research, her advocacy. Friendship encouraged her, literally gave her heart. That is something that all of us need. During their last summer together in Maine, Rachel and Dorothy spent a morning on a rocky point where they witnessed the migration of monarch butterflies. Later that day, Rachel wrote Dorothy a note. This is a postscript to our morning, something I think I can write better than say. For me, it was one of the loveliest of the summer's hours, and all the details will remain in my memory. That blue September sky, the sounds of wind in the spruces and surf on the rocks, the gulls busy with their foraging, alighting with deliberate grace. But most of all, I shall remember the monarchs, that unhurried drift of one small winged form after another, each drawn by some invisible force. We talked a little about their life history. Did they return? We thought not. For most, at least, this was the closing journey of their lives. But it occurred to me this afternoon, remembering, that it has been a happy spectacle, that we had felt no sadness when we spoke of the fact that there would be no return. And rightly, for when any living thing has come to the end of its cycle, we accept that end as natural. For the monarch butterfly, that cycle is measured in a known span of months. For ourselves, the measure is something else, the span of which we cannot know. But the thought is the same. When that intangible cycle has run its course, it is a natural and not unhappy thing that a life comes to its end. That is what those brightly fluttering bits of life taught me this morning. I found a deep happiness in it. I hope you may also. Thank you for this morning. Rachel wrote a small book for children titled The Sense of Wonder, and it is in homage to that sense of wonder I wish to close. I think that that is what we right here are most all about. When every Sunday service ends, when every meeting concludes, and every folding chair is folded and put back into place, when every plant fare is tallied, when the last note is sounded on piano or clarinet or flute, when every sermon finds its wordy way to a final period, all that we're about here, the reason people participate in outfits like this, is to help one another and ourselves find and re-find some sense of wonder. Not in theological stuff, well, maybe sometimes in theological stuff, but certainly in the world around us, in kids and old people and even ourselves, just as we are, here and now. It was Chesterton, you remember, who said that the world shall never want for lack of wonders, only for lack of wonder. That is what I love about Mark Bailey's photographs of balanced rocks. There are a couple of versions on the cover of our orders of service. He goes and he balances these rocks himself, and they may only last for a few moments, but he does manage to take a photograph of them before they topple. And when I look at these, I am amazed. I am astonished. If stones are capable of kindling, they rekindle my sense of wonder. The seventh principle of our Unitarian Universalist purposes and principles is respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. I don't think that we would have said those words had it not been for Rachel Carson. And anyway, it's all about holding on to that sense of wonder, not losing it. Well, actually, you probably will lose it, but you can find it again and again and again and again. And maybe it will be in bees or in fossils or in friends who happen to be fossils, or in stars or monarchs or in the sea around us, or I have no idea where you may find it. But almost certainly right now, it is under your noses or just above your head. And so, in the spirit of Rachel Carson, I wish for you love and friendship and a sense of wonder. And I thank you for this morning. Thank you for this morning. And before we move on, I ask you to turn to the person next to you or reach across the pew and just say thank you. You can say more if you like, but say thank you at least. Thank you for this morning. Amen. Now just do it. Amen, and honey-be-lujah, and we will sing For the Earth Forever Turning. Our concluding hymn is 163. This is the concluding verse of Lee Young Lee's poem From Blossoms. There are days we live as if death were nowhere in the background. From joy to joy, from wing to wing, from blossom to impossible blossom to sweet, impossible blossom. Amen. Honey-be-lujah. May it be so.